With all of the codecs, frame rates, and compressions, how do you get the best footage out of this pro quality drone? Well, I've shot a bunch of test shots with many of these different settings, and I'll give you my personal recommendations, but I'll also give you all of the footage files in the description below so that you can take a look for yourself. I'll explain how the footage is labeled in a little bit. Let's get to my recommendations. First off, I would definitely recommend reducing the sharpness and the noise reduction both to -2. You can do this by tapping on the 3-button icon in the upper right corner, going to your camera settings, scrolling down till you see the little triangle and circle image, tapping on that, and you'll see that it's for sharpness and noise reduction, and slide those to -2. The image is far too noisy in underexposed areas and overly sharp and unnatural in properly exposed areas at the standard 0 setting. This is across the board in all shooting versions and types. I then found that the 30 frames per second HQ version did seem to outperform the 60 frames per second, particularly in noise, even in a properly exposed area. When zooming in 300% and bringing up the exposure on underexposed areas, I did find that either of the H.265 versions seemed to perform the best, and I didn't see a measurable difference between the MOV or the MP4 version of this, but H.265 seemed to have less noise than all the H.264 versions. Now, if you have a slower computer and it can't handle H.265 files well, then I can't find noticeable differences among any of the H.264 versions, so you can choose any of those. Regarding ISO, I do recommend Auto ISO. In the outdoor shot, I did an Auto ISO version and an ISO 100 version, which I then gradually brought up the exposure in post, and I definitely found that the 100 came out with more noise and blotchiness than the Auto ISO take. So there you have it. 4K, one of the HQ frame rates in the H.265 compression with Auto ISO is my personal recommendation. If you want to download all of these clips and test them for yourself, then go for it. I have them labeled starting with the location, then the sharpness and noise reduction level, so either 2 zeros or 2 twos, standing for -2 on each, then the frame rate, either 30 or 60, and then H.264 or H.265, followed by the ISO value. Of course, you'll be able to see whether it was an MOV or an MP4 file by the file type. First off, I shot everything in 4K, of course, and decinema-like color rather than the normal color profile. Secondly, the 24, 25, and 30 frames per second options have what DJI calls their HQ, or as my UK friends say, HQ, feature, which they claim is a dual ISO. Now, Philip Bloom's phenomenal review of this drone debunks this and explains technically what is going on, but for all intents and purposes, it is attempting to create the best quality footage in both under and overexposed areas by replicating a dual ISO feature. The 24, 25, and 30 frames per second options are locked in at this, whereas the 48, 50, and 60 are not. So I shot one frame rate of each, assuming that all of the HQ frame rates would perform the same, and all of the non-HQ frame rates would also perform identically. I shot in 30 and 60 frames per second because those are the frame rates that I prefer and shoot in all of the time. Now, I know most of you prefer 24 frames per second, and my UK friends prefer 25, but if it's really that important to you, then I guess you're gonna have to run the test yourself. Sorry. I also did the standard shutter speed in proportion or relation to the frame rate that I chose. So when I'm shooting in 30 frames per second, I used a shutter speed of 1/60th, and when I shot in 60 frames per second, I did the shutter speed at 1/120th. From there, though, I did shoot in each codec and file type from MP4 and MOV, as well as H.264 and H.265, all of those possible combinations in both frame rates, and I also shot each of those iterations with a sharpness and noise reduction value each at 0, and then both at -2. This shot I did at ISO 100 and features a very dark underexposed area and a bright properly exposed area. This shot I did in extreme low light at ISO 400 and ISO 3200. And this shot I did at both ISO 100 with a 64 ND filter and then Auto ISO with the same ND filter. Well, I hope this video was helpful for you because though I won't be seeing you in the next one, you're sure to see me. Rough.